We haven't necessarily worked together that closely, so there are a few bugs to be worked out, but we're good. So I wanted to, Jack and I wanted to thank you for coming this morning to this, what we call a Sanibel Island discussion. It has nothing to do with Sanibel Island or ecology or anything, or global warming, although there might be a question on that. It is simply that on Sanibel Island,
Are you talking to us?
I am.
We're not.
You're not hearing me?
We're not hearing you.
Okay, let me start over. Jack and I would like to thank you for coming. We will have what we call a Sanibel Island discussion this morning, which, as I said, has really nothing to do with Sanibel Island other than the format. Someone from this congregation was on Sanibel Island, and some church or community group had a discussion with this format, hence a Sanibel Island discussion. If you long to go to Sanibel Island but have never been there, we won't be discussing that this morning. I'm sorry. And so we'll be posing some questions to you, and we would like your response. In fact, your response is really essential, right, to have a discussion. All that we ask is that we have a civil and respectful discussion of the issues. So I'll start with the first question, and then Jack and I will alternate, and you can respond, and please, you have a mic, good, all right, thank you. Let me ask the first question. Yesterday, by a vote of 50 to 48, the Senate confirmed Brett Kavanaugh to a lifetime seat on the Supreme Court. In your opinion, was the FBI background investigation into Judge Kavanaugh thorough enough to warrant a vote at this particular time?
I'm not sure if I need a mic.
Everyone needs someone.
No.
Since nobody's been able to read the report but senators, how would we know?
No, I don't think they went into enough detail.
Would you like to elaborate, Jim?
Yeah, I thought they should have talked, they should have interviewed all of the other people who had some exposure to that party that they referred to, or to other issues that have been raised. It seemed to me that the FBI had blinders which had been imposed by the administration.
So then one of your main criticisms is they didn't really talk to enough people who might have had something to say.
Exactly.
Okay.
I think public discourse was held hijacked or taken over by this discussion of sexual assault and drinking, when really it should have been judicial temperament. And I think that allowing the whole Me Too movement to be shrill and angry only energized the Republican base. And the threat that he gave, what comes around comes around, goes around comes around, should have been the tipping point where you say, no, he shouldn't be a judge, irregardless of all the other stuff.
Anybody else? I agree with Debbie.
Hold it closer.
Yeah, don't kiss it, really.
Is that close enough?
That's-
Yes, I can hear myself.
That's when you have it close enough.
I decided quite early that I couldn't make up my mind that Kavanaugh was the person who assaulted Dr. Ford, but based on his temperament that he displayed in the hearing, I decided that I did not want him for justice.
Get someone down there.
Next to you, Sean.
Yeah,
There were enough comments from various people to suggest that this guy's got something like pathologic intoxication, and that when he gets drunk, he becomes bellicose and abusive to men as well as women. And I think it was obligatory that the FBI should have interviewed some people who reported other things and not just Ford and her party.
I agree very much with what you said there. I just had a chance to get a good glimpse this morning. I'm going, I guess, off the question, but the New York Times, where McGann from the FBI pulled Kavanaugh and his wife in and says, you gotta come back and you gotta go fight it with all your might. And it just, to me, it was much more about his behavior or his demeanor and his judicial future and his bias that, and the FBI certainly circumvented any further looking investigation into that. Or the president did.
All right, so we'll move on to the second question. Jack?
It's a good opportunity for you to rant and rave. I mean, we're not seeing a lot of anger here, but and then maybe the second one will bring it up. What will be the political consequences of the bitter battle over the confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh in the midterm elections?
Are you taking bets?
Well, I think we'll find out soon enough. I can give my own opinion because I have a bet riding with my nephew. About a month ago.
Sure.
If you get it closer to your mouth, they're
Okay.
having a hard time hearing.
About a month ago, I
Take
would
it
have.
up so you're pointing towards you.
Like
You're talking over it.
There you
Yes.
go.
Yes.
Okay. About a month ago, I would have given plus minus of 3 votes in the House that the Democrats would take the House with a majority of 3 votes. I actually took my nephew up plus minus 5. He thought there'd be a blue wave, and I thought there'd be a blue trickle. So if it's under 3, we'll know that this whole process redounded to the benefit of the Republicans. You know, it kind of harkens back to, I think a lot of people feel that what happened to Kavanaugh may have been what happened to the people at Duke. The baseless charges that were made against the fraternity guys who did not assault that black dancer, but certainly would have been convicted in a jury if the trial were held in Durham. There was that much town down animosity. These were charges that could possibly, you know, first of all, the statute of limitation had run out long ago. So the question is, what happened when Kavanaugh was 17 and Ford was 16 or whatever, and is it even relevant if it can't be proven? I think the question that Mark asked before was kind of beside the point. If you're going to block the nomination of Kavanaugh, it can't be because, it obviously wasn't going to be because you could establish sexual assault, but could you establish that he lied under oath? You know, there was a compelling interview that CNN had with his roommate that Kavanaugh clearly knew what Devil's Triangle was, and he clearly knew what boofing was, and if you're going to keep the guy off the court, it's not going to be based on temperament, because once you make it once you make a hearing about trying to destroy somebody as a person, that's what happened to Clarence Thomas. You take somebody who's conservative, and forever he's not only going to vote conservative, but he's going to be bitter. You can't attack somebody as a man or a person and expect to win that fight. I think the FBI's charge, unless they could establish that he perjured himself, I just couldn't see it going anywhere. I think he probably did perjure himself, but that wasn't what the FBI was charged with finding out. And I think the quick answer to your question is, if the Democrats don't take Congress, or they take Congress by fewer than 3 votes, then this process was harmful to the Democrats. That's my short answer.
I'm not sure if this is a political consequence, but I read one article, I think it was in the Plain Dealer, or maybe it was online. But the impact was that they wanted him on the court to handle some court cases that are coming up in the near future.
How about a vote on this one? How many thinks this helps Democrats and how many thinks it helps Republicans?
Yeah,
It'd be interesting to know. I'm curious as to what people think.
I don't know.
I don't either.
What else Republicans?
Well, how many people think it helps the Republicans?
Wow.
How many people think it helps the Democrats? Okay.
How many don't know?
Oh.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually,
Definitely Unitarians.
our third question,
You got a question here? Maybe you can be a little closer.
Is there a way to turn the volume up on these, or it's up all the way?
You have to make sure, first of all, that you're holding it properly when you talk. Please, like this. Not like this, not like this.
Okay.
Like this.
Is that better, Nancy? Can you hear that? What
Can you hear me?
When you face me.
Well, of course, I'm talking right next to you too.
Maybe if you said it.
We can, I'll have to get someone to do that. I can't do it.
I'll see you later.
our third question is a broader question. In the past 2 years now, what do you think has been the impact of the election of Donald Trump to the presidency on the Republican Party? Do you want me to repeat the question? Did everyone hear it? Okay. What is the impact of Trump on the GOP? And I suppose, is that overall for the Republicans, positive or negative?
Good question.
I know. For most of this crowd, it's obviously negative, in my opinion. But the only thing it's done for the Republicans is given them someone to rally around, and some of them aren't too happy about that. But it at least got them in a power position to do what some of the things they wanted to do. Whether they're in agreement with all Trump's programs or not, they got the power position.
The thing that has bothered me that goes to the thing that has bothered me that has gone to this question is, well, we keep talking about Trump's base, and how he's doing well and everything. The media concentrates on that base and is not looking at the rest of us in terms of the 60% perhaps. And it just seems to me there's a real, it's about media sales or media coverage and that. So that's my 2 cents.
I guess I'm concerned that the moderate Republicans are so afraid of Trump's base that it's really changed their ability to express their interests and concerns. So I think there's a lot of Republicans who are probably very quietly distressed about what's happening to their party.
I would back that up. I would say, okay? I would back that up. I think that the Republican Party that we once knew is kaput, dead, gone. And the people who would have been there need to organize themselves into something with a new and different name, or somehow fix it so that the people who are called Republicans at this point and who are in absolute control get pushed off. We need another party or a new iteration of the GOP. It is no longer what it was. We all used to know people who were coherent on both sides. Now, the fringes are out of their minds, but the Republicans that are in control, would that be faux Republicans, have been working on this for 40 years. And the rest of us have not paid attention. I know I was standing on my head about the Supreme Court a while back, and nobody seemed to hear what I was saying. You know, it's always been about the Supreme Court for a long time. And he's put in 2 judges at the Supreme Court, and what, 60? Lower down or something? I mean, it's stacked the way the crazies want it. And so now we have to somehow get everybody, first of all, to vote. There are people who aren't coming out. There are young women with no sense of history. I mean, don't they know what women had to do to get the vote? And everything is going backwards. And the Roe versus Wade, you know, maybe if a whole bunch of 20-year-old girls die because they went to a back alley person because they no longer can get access because of the lower courts, Roe versus Wade stands. But the lower courts are fixing it so you can't get there. Right. So maybe we have to have, you know, a generation of young women that die, God forbid, you know, for people to sort of pay attention. This is, how's that for rant?
Good. Love your anger.
You know, when our country was started, there was a worry about, you know, who has the balance of power. And so we did a lot of work to make sure that rural areas have power. And that's why we have the Senate. So each state has their 2 votes. So the result is that as more and more people move into urban areas who are largely Democrat, and these rural areas have more Republicans, we really don't have power as Democrats. I mean, the last couple of Republican presidents did not get the majority vote. They got the, whatever that was. Electoral college votes, thank you. And then the Republicans are galvanized by a couple issues that maybe the Democrats don't have. So there's the right to life issue. The pro-life group is going to vote for Trump no matter how despicable they find the rest of his morals. Every vote they're going to take is based on the right to life. The other is, I was riding in today, and this Republican woman was talking about fighting rampant socialism. So socialism is another big like red flag for Republicans, not realizing that Medicare is socialism. And so, you know, we've allowed the dialogue as Democrats to, I guess we let them take over the language so that we don't realize that the Medicare that everybody wants to take is a form of socialism. We have to maybe find another word to describe the social compact, which is kind of falling apart at this point. I just don't see how the Democrats are going to ever come back. And I think we have to stop thinking it's one man, one vote, because it's not one man, one vote. It's all based on voting districts, which have been gerrymandered to give power to the Republicans. And until that changes, nothing's going to happen. And until we change the way the Electoral College is set up, it's not going to work. Having lived in rural Wisconsin for many years, I have to say that rural Wisconsin was Democrat in the old days, but now it's staunchly Republican, and they hate the urban people moving into the rural areas, taking over, and they're really have a lot of anger at what they see the Democrats as trying to force on them, whether it be manure spreading laws or not letting my cow walk in the streams. I mean, there's just all sorts of issues that galvanize them to vote for a person that they think is despicable in many ways.
I think Trump's election and his activities have increased the polarization in this country, which is accentuated by the gerrymandering that Debbie referred to. There doesn't seem to be very, very few people now who can work across the aisle. It's either my way or the highway.
I want to say something about the rural issues that Debbie brought up, because I was reading in an article this week that really caught my attention about coal mining. Now, I spent a lot of years in West Virginia in coal mining towns, and Labor and Democrat and Union and all of that were all one and the same. The statistics really shocked me in this article, because it said that in the 30s and 40s, 800,000 workers were in the mines. There are now 53,000 in the mines because of all of the mechanization. And of those 53,000, 2.5% are union. I nearly fell off the chair. It's an enormous change. And the people, for example, in West Virginia, which is now Republican in most of those areas that were heavily Democrat and heavily Union, have voted for Trump because his words, his phrases, he's going to bring coal mining jobs back, and they counted the ones, and he has brought back, I don't know, 1,500, according to the article. But the media part is also scary to me, because everyone just listens to their side of the issue on the radio rather than getting both sides. And that's a human behavior issue that I don't know how we can ameliorate or change or encourage, because they're not getting necessarily both sides from one station anymore. And the social media messaging, and the Democrats, as Debbie said, are not as good at messaging, not nearly as good at messaging as are the Republicans. So you put that together with lower education standards and gerrymandering and all the rest, and you have a prescription for additional division within the country. And I don't know what can be unifying, but I think it has to start with some messaging and some powerful leaders that, as Jim said, work across the aisle. And that takes education, and education on a number of issues. And I'm very involved in voter registration in the lower income areas here, and what I see is not encouraging right now. That's another issue that we'll get into, because we have some forums coming up on that. But we also have a forum coming up on abortion on October 21st. So I think that will provide a good discussion on all the various state laws that might be enacted, because the abortion issue might come back to states' rights again. So we need to be aware of all of that as we use our own energy and our own resources and our own time to determine what we can do to change what's happening, and use intelligent decision making based on facts and information, which these forums are a part of. And that's the end of my talk.
The only comment I wanted to make for the other question was, we have to realize how complicit both political parties are and have been in the whole electoral process. Remember, in 1988, the only chance that the Democrats felt that they had was due to the Electoral College, that they conceded that they were going to lose the popular vote, but if they carried enough big states, Michigan and New York and so on, California, and they had a formula where they could win 20 states and carry the electoral college. So the Democrats didn't want to reform the electoral vote either. The system exists the way it is because both parties wanted it that way. And I would posit that the same thing holds for gerrymandering. If you want majority black congressional districts, then you're going to gerrymander the districts so that almost every black voter fits into one of 4 districts in Ohio. And then the Democrats are going to lose the other 12. And the best example that I can think of is South Carolina. How many electoral votes does South Carolina? I think they have maybe 11 districts. One is gerrymandered so much that every single black voter in the state is in one of them. And that district is about 1 street wide. It's a highway that connects black neighborhoods. So you've got 1 liberal congressman in South Carolina and 10 crackers. And that's the way Democrats want it. It makes no sense to me. You don't have to gerrymander districts. Ohio has 16 districts. You can draw lines up and down and crisscross the state and you get 16 districts. And they'll be random. It'll probably be 9-7. But no political party wants it that way. And that's why we're stuck with what we have. The Democrats are complicit. And my mother, who's a New Dealer, is still alive, wouldn't recognize the Democratic Party either. In 1936, the biggest landslide the Democrats have ever had, who remembers which 2 states voted for
Kansas and Vermont.
No, it was Vermont and Maine, 2 of the bluest states now, and the solid South was Democratic, and the Democrats carried the white blue-collar vote. This is not your mother's or grandmother's Democratic Party either, and the Democrats have to take a look in the mirror and figure out what it's going to take to win an election, and it ain't going to be a candidate who looks like the candidate that the Democrats ran in 2016. I think Harbaugh's going to win, but he's going to win running against Nancy Pelosi. He's not going to win running against the Republicans. Have you seen his ads? Yeah. Harbaugh.
Ken Harbaugh is a Democratic candidate running against Robert Gibbs, who's a Republican. And much of the ad focuses on his military background, and one of his ads has a dig at Nancy Pelosi. So he's trying to sort of run a race in which he is not tied by the Republicans to the Democratic leadership in Washington, yet he's running as a Democrat. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. I think, you know, you can ask another question later, but a lot of it boils down to sex. And I can explain that in a much more, but if you look at the Sturgis rally in South Dakota, where everybody rides a hog, votes Republican. They love it. They love him. They ride Harleys, and everybody who works for Harley and rides a Harley votes for Trump. And you should see the women who are strutting their stuff in Sturgis, South Dakota. They're not ashamed of it. Very different from the Me Too movement, but that's a different story. I think the Democrats have to figure out how to win elections now, and they haven't done it. But I could give them advice.
Very good, very good, excellent remarks today. A number of members of our congregation have been active in Planned Parenthood, including leadership roles. Does the selection of Neil Gorsuch and now Brett Kavanaugh signal the end of Roe v. Wade?
Yeah, I'll speak to that, and there'll be maybe a controversial comment on it. Yeah, I think it's going to happen. I mean, I think Roe versus Wade will be overturned. I think the people who are pro-life have worked on this a long time. They've worked on it many angles. They've chipped it away at every state in the country with contraceptive availability. They've cut funding available to family planning clinics. I'm a product of the Planned Parenthood system. I'm a nurse practitioner in women's health, paid for by the federal government and Planned Parenthood. Well, I was originally up in New York, but the school moved down to Philadelphia, so in 1980 I became a nurse practitioner. And Planned Parenthood has, to use the vernacular, screwed themselves royally with their approach to abortion. Because they have used the wave of abortion rights, they have ruined the family planning system in this country, because they've allowed the continued image of Planned Parenthood as ability to get an abortion as opposed to ability to get contraceptive services. Because what you're going to find is with these laws that are anti-abortion, they're also restricting access to contraceptive services, because some contraceptive methods would be considered abortifacient by scientific fact as well as by the laws that they want to put in place. And so it's going to happen. I mean, already we have, you know, the emergency centers in certain cities that where you go for if you're raped, for your rape crisis center, that don't provide abortion pills as an example. They won't give the morning after pill unless there's an LH search test done which proves you're not ovulating. If you're ovulating, they won't give it to you. So there's a lot of things like that that are already happening. What doctor in their right mind is going to provide abortion services in many areas because they can't get hospital privileges then? So it's snowballing, and I think it's going to happen. Yeah. And I think it's because we've allowed the abortion standard to be the only word that's out there. I mean, every Planned Parenthood I've worked for, it's less than 1% of our services. But the other 99% of our services is being harmed by this situation.
I don't think the Supreme Court is going to specifically overrule Roe versus Wade, but I think they're going to continue the process which Debbie was talking to, which is chipping away at reproductive rights, so that it'll become more and more difficult for women to get the health advice and services that they're looking for.
Just a second. Before we go to the next question, I just wanted to make a comment as to how Roe v. Wade will not be overturned, but will be marginalized. And it will go like this. As soon as Kavanaugh gets on the Supreme Court, the state of Mississippi or some other state will pass a law which outlaws abortion completely. Abortion is illegal. It will be challenged in court. It will go to the Supreme Court and will be upheld 5-4. That means that abortion rights then become a state matter. States in the South and maybe in the West, wherever there is a majority in the state legislature, GOP, will then pass a law that outlaws abortion. And it can't be challenged because it's already been upheld. And if you want an abortion and you're living in Kansas, you'll have to go to California or New York. So will abortion be illegal throughout the country? No, it'll simply be illegal in most of the country. Your turn.
Does anyone else want to have on Mark's comment, or can we move on to the next topic? Why don't you just leave the microphone with him?
No, Mark, I think you're absolutely right. And Obama said the same thing, that ultimately abortion is going to be a state issue.
I told him to say that.
Very good. On to a new topic. Every year I go to Sanibel Island, and I thought when Susan asked me to do this that it was going to be about Sanibel Island. So let me tell you what Sanibel Island has right now. Piles and piles of dead fish as a result of red tide and also toxic algae blooms. Most of the toxic algae blooms there come from Lake Okeechobee and all of the sugarcane agriculture business. So it's a terrible place to be right now. And they are also very much concerned about a 1-inch raise in the sea levels, because 1 inch means hundreds and hundreds of miles of beach in Sanibel will be underwater. So what is the impact of global warming today, and what are our concerns in that area? Bob over here, Bob.
I was reading last night a report on the water crisis looming for Miami, Florida, because of global warming. And the fact that the aquifers they have are being overcome with seawater. And this is only, and you've all already heard that there's a major water supply problem in Cape Town, South Africa. I think this is going to be more frequent event on our horizons in the near future, because global warming is happening. One of the prominent evidences for that is the fact that after living in our house for 54 years, we installed air conditioning this fall.
Cliff, you have a comment? Need the microphone.
There's going to be several impacts with global warming. As mentioned, the aquifers and sea level communities are going to be destroyed effectively. Global warming, increasing temperatures, war is going to be fought over water, most likely, especially in parched regions already, like such as the Middle East. Water will replace oil. The frequency and severity of the storms will be affected. We were affected by Superstorm Sandy. And to my knowledge, the last time we were affected by a storm was in 1954, when a major hurricane hit. But we're going to be, more and more, we're going to be affected by the rains this far from the coast. So, strength and severity of the storms and the overall climate change, looking at our winters, we had those two rough winters, but then we've had a lot of mild. And snowpack, you look at the snowpack in California, it's gone. The glaciers are gone. Glaciers are leaving. And that's the melting glaciers in the summer, the normal ebb and flow provides water from the Himalayas down to much of India. And those glaciers that feed that summer water are gone because they're not getting built up. Same in California. That's why California is in drought. You may have seen the pictures with Jerry Brown in March. There's supposed to be 20 feet of snow and he's standing on the ground. So it's going to be wide-ranging, bigger than we can plan on, I think.
I also think that global warming is causing climate change. I used to say, oh, it's windier than it used to be, and Mark said, well, you can't say that unless you can prove it. And then he did a little research, and it is windier. And so when we have forest fires and we have more wind in our circle of the earth, the forest fires are worse than they used to be. So I worry not only about global warming, but climate change and how that's doing our earth in too.
So our next question for us to ponder and anguish over is, in terms of the ongoing crisis in Israel-Palestine, do you think the goal of a two-state solution is viable or dead as a doornail? Why or why not?
Well, the two-state solution is the obvious solution, but it's not the emotional solution. And the emotional solution is going to cause a lot of trouble in the next 50 years. So I don't think that the two-state solution is going to be achieved in the next near future, even though it's the obvious one.
Can you expand on the emotional solution?
people want things to stay like they were. They want them back like they were, I should say. And
1947.
yeah, and so the Arabs want their land back, and the Israelis want a land, period. And these two emotional states are going to be in conflict for some time. So I don't think that problem is going to go away anytime soon, unfortunately.
Okay, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Will the fate of Obamacare during the run of the 2020 presidential election, is the single-payer plan a viable alternative?
I just want to say if we really push on my side for the single payer plan, we'll definitely lose because it goes and smacks of socialism. I think we need to continue with the Affordable Health Care Act. The reason why it was started the way it was with all the involvement of these insurance companies is that we can't just wipe out an industry. You have to find a way. I mean,
Why not?
why can't you wipe out it? Because you can't. All those jobs involved, you just can't upend our country that way. It will never work. We've got to find a way to keep the Affordable Health Care Act, get rid of the Obama name on it, and keep the Affordable Health Care Act in some form the way it is in cooperation with insurance companies, even though I hate insurance companies. I don't like the whole system, but single payer plan is socialism, and you'll just rally up the Republicans to vote against it.
Single payer is the obvious solution to our problems, but we aren't going to do it because the insurance industry won't let us do it. They will fund everybody who opposes it, and we will wind up having to go back to something like the Affordable Care Act, which is kind of a bastardization of single payer.
Oh, it's not. It's a corporation insurance company.
Okay.
Well, I think the Affordable Care Act is correct, especially as implemented, because truthfully, it is the Heritage Foundation plan lifted, and having the tax, if you want to call it a tax, where everybody has skin in the game. So, which is a fair way of doing it. When I have to go to the doctor, I do have to pay something. So I don't go for frivolous reasons, but if you can't afford it, that's where the subsidies come in. If you're, already just economically disadvantaged. But it does prevent you from getting bankrupt because you got leukemia. Let's face it, nobody can afford leukemia. My brother had it. His bill came to $400,000. That's not affordable. So that's where it comes in. But by having the tax, where everybody has some skin in the game, and it's not socialism then you're actually paying for what you're getting, and it's an insurance policy as well, because maybe you'll never break a leg. There's some people who, hey, they'll go 80 years and nothing happens. But we all have something. You're going to fall off your ladder because you were painting, or car wreck, or illness. So you need something. But by having a tax, I think everybody has some skin in the game.
I think most of us agree. I think Medicare for all is the best solution. It would be easy, we kind of know how to do it, and we know that it works reasonably well. But it's politically untenable right now because everybody will label it socialism, which of course it is. So I think it bothers me that the Democrats don't have any rallying cry. And if our only rallying cry is abortion rights, then everybody who holds up a picture of a bloody fetus is going to get 3 votes while we lose 4. It just doesn't work. So we need something else, and healthcare is something that people can rally behind because it's something we all need. And I think the Affordable Care Act can be made popular and can be strengthened. And there's obviously no way to pay for it except to have healthy people forced to pay for it in the same way that people whose houses aren't likely to burn down are having to support the fire department. It's socialistic, of course.
Well, it's also common good.
Yeah, exactly.
everybody seemed to agree that it was also a common good. But what happens when the common good exhausts the supply of whatever you think is good that's available in the environment? You have a serious problem. And in my view, many of our serious problems are hung on assumptions, one of which is buried in the current conversation. We're talking about healthcare, and that's based on the assumption that everyone has a right to life once they're born. But consider the long-term consequences of that. If you have no limits on who's born, you will soon outgrow your supply of necessities for that population as well. That particular problem is being ignored by everyone. But we're experiencing it directly, but we continue to ignore it.
I'll rant about that. As far as I can tell, the best thing that's ever been invented for population control is sending girls to high school, not limiting births. Because when girls go to high school, they are having babies at 14, 15, 16. Every country that educates women has had a decline in population, or at least they're no longer at replacement levels.
One of the consequences of ignoring the problem of population is that it will take care of itself in forms that we don't like.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
How do you see population control operating?
Unfortunately, I haven't the faintest idea. I only know that it's not paying attention to it is aggravating the situation, I suspect, more than it needs to be aggravated. If we paid more attention, we keep ignoring the subject or not bringing it up.
See, I obviously agree with you because I spent my life dispensing contraceptive to women. So, I mean, I understand that. The problem is that how you get that discussion out in a way that's not threatening. And then there's the issue of these countries like our country without immigration would have too many old people. We don't have a high population growth. Most of Europe doesn't have a good population growth. Japan is in serious trouble. And yet, so we need young people to do the jobs. We have many more old people. We're living way too long. We live almost as many years not working as maybe we did working in some cases, not quite that much, but we need young people. We need young people to be human, and so how do we do this? I don't have an answer for it.
The current problem of having too many old people, like myself, is that we're not paying attention to the problem. And not paying attention gets you into situations like this. I don't know what the solution is, but I do suspect that paying attention to the problem is part of the solution. It's going to correct itself one way or another, whether we do anything about it or not. But if we pay attention and decide to do something about it, or try to do something about it, we may, in fact, moderate the effects a little bit. We're not going to escape them.
In the last 11 months, another $1 trillion has been added to our national debt. Under President Trump, the budget deficit has significantly increased. Should we be concerned about this growing debt? Why?
Yes, we should be concerned. The thing that bothers me is why aren't the Democrats speaking out? You know, when Republicans call Democrats tax and spend Democrats, you know, what I see is Republicans lower the taxes and spend more. And we need a way to get that across, that that's happening. So, I'm not the person to do that, but I don't know why those in power aren't talking to that issue.
Yeah, I think that the economy is showing some kind of false benefits from cutting taxes when really, with the debt, we can't really afford to cut taxes. And at this time, it's just, I don't hear a lot about, when they talk about the economy doing better, I don't hear a lot about that, the debt, that we may be going into debt to do it.
This summer, the Supreme Court voted 5-4 in the case of Janus versus AFSCME. That's a public employee union. They voted 5-4 to outlaw something called agency shop. And these are, agency shop is a provision in a union contract of public sector unions. And it allows a employee, it requires an employee to financially support the union whether or not they choose to join. The philosophy being that, well, the union is negotiating their salary and benefits, and they should pay something to support that service that's provided to them. Now this has been eliminated. In your view, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And also, those who support the taking away of agency shop say that agency shop violates the First Amendment rights of employees who don't wish to belong to a union or contribute to a union. What is your opinion on this contentious issue?
Well, I've been directly involved in it because I was an AFSCME member for many years, and I was an AFSCME member in rural Wisconsin in a public health department, and we had to pay union dues. I think we called it a closed shop is what we referred to it. So my union dues, $20 a month, is automatically taken out of my paycheck. My problem, I actually think it would kill the unions is what it'll do, because most people won't agree to have that money taken out. I was treasurer of our union because I needed to be involved. But the union was so abusive to me as an employee that it really bugged the hell out of me, I have to say. I mean, I was a professional person with a master's degree, and my union was secretaries and janitors. So the secretaries and janitors were paid way above the going rate in the county, and us nurse practitioners could not begin to get a raise. I didn't get benefits, so my in lieu of fringe was $1 an hour, which was way below what those fringe benefits were worth. And when I tried to advocate for our professional group couldn't get continuing ed credits, which is standard in the medical field to get continuing ed credits, but the janitors and secretaries who ran the union didn't think that was necessary. And so you can see where people would really feel abused by the union. They did not negotiate for my benefits. They only negotiated for their own benefits. They were full-time. Most of us nurse practitioners were kept at part-time levels, which actually I wanted to be part-time, but it also meant I had less power within the union decision-making. And so, because the unions are so hard-line in how they approach things, they take a union group and they disenfranchise some of their members, which allowed this decision to come about, and why some people would sue them because they didn't feel represented. And at this time, I think unions need all the members they can get, and I think they've done a valuable thing in terms of the benefits people get. So despite the fact that I did not feel represented by AFSCME, I think I think it's a wrong decision. I think it's unfortunate, but it may not be fair.
I just wanted Mark Janus, the defendant in the case. He was a public employee in Illinois, and he brought the case, which went to the Supreme Court and was decided in his favor. It's interesting fact. You can make of it what you want. As soon as the case was decided in his favor, he quit his job and went to work for a conservative think tank associated with the National Right to Work Committee, which is opposed to all union rights and in fact would like to do away with unions. So sometimes the impetus for this comes not necessarily from individual abuse, but from simply a corporate hatred of unions as institutions which advocate collective action by employees. That's just a, well, it was a little bit of opinion, my apologies.
No, I think that's good, because that is an important point. I mean, that is a wrong decision. But I do think unions as a movement needs to not be heavy-handed and top-heavy with their employees. It's like any institution. The people in charge want to stay in charge and take benefits for themselves. I mean, my own feeling is that the only way we can change the way our world is to stop idol worship, stop honoring people because they're famous. Because I think anytime someone becomes famous, has power, even if it's at the local union level or if it's you're president of the United States, I think people take advantage of being in power, and I think there's not enough self-handicapping, not enough understanding that the common good should be looked at, and that common good means that sometimes I do things that aren't the best for me. So I would never have sued the union for what I viewed as mistreatment, but because I was going for the good of the group, and I think how do we get people to look at the good of the group instead of what's good for me?
The answer to your question, is the union good or bad? And my answer is it's both, depending on the circumstances. There are good things that unions have done, but as Debbie just illustrated, people in power tend to over-exercise that power, and that makes some of their actions turn out to be bad. So one of the problems we have in our society is being inclined to label things in the extremes instead of accepting the intermediate position that it can be both under different circumstances.
I grew up in an area of family where there was a lot of animus against unions. It seems to me that absent extreme regulation, there's always going to be a tension between capital and labor, and unions are the only power that labor has. And capital, especially corporate capital, has its fiduciary responsibility to stockholders and no responsibility to its employees or its customers, for that matter. So there has to be a balance of power, otherwise you end up with paupers and billionaires and nobody in between. And the unions were really a major factor in creating and maintaining the American middle class. And as they have gotten progressively weaker, so has our middle class. We have a lot more poor people, a lot more rich people.
I want to second that balance of power, because if you look at a triangle and you have the owners of the business, the workers of the business, and the consumers of the business, you have some form of balance of power between them. I remember the consumer movement with Ralph Nader coming up in the 60s. I was a part of that. And in terms of being a part of the labor movement, my parents back in West Virginia were Republican. But we got John L. Lewis's birthday off school. And John L. Lewis was the one that organized the miners. So growing up today, there's not the messages that young people have or that young adults have on what unions are all about. They haven't experienced it as I did growing up. And when they go to work, whether it's a menial job with minimum wage or somewhere above that if they have more of an education, there's still not that awareness of what they can do collectively. So that I agree. I think unions have been extremely powerful and for the benefit of certain people in the middle class as a stepping stone, like education now is more of a stepping stone. But I consider that a loss when we don't have the messages, when we don't have the awareness of how important movements are and organizational expertise to get people together, to be more powerful, so that balance of power. I think we've lost consumer power too, very definitely. So the old triumvirate of workers, owners, consumers has somehow gotten lost in that shuffle. And I don't know how to bring it back, but I feel that we've lost a lot of what used to be and was a kind of foundational part of our existence.
Okay, we've been developing ideas. I'm sorry, was there another speaker who wanted it? Okay, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
I spent part of my early life in Europe, as it turned out. My father was running away from that insane man who thought everybody was a communist. Father was not a communist, but we got out of the country. And so I grew up with age 7 to 13 speaking French. So I am like Obama, someone who's been sort of out of it. I think there are too many people in this country whose worldview is as far as a street corner. They don't know anything about what's happening in the rest of the world, and that we need to look abroad at how other countries and disseminate the information about what other countries are doing. And there are thoughts like people now, and this is probably happening on some of our boards here, where a certain percentage of the people who control a factory or something must be workers. You know, not everybody can be the bosses. You have to bring in the other people. It's sort of like 11 men faced that amazing woman, all Republicans to judge her. The Democrats had women on their side, some of them, right? We don't have enough of people who need to be represented in various places. And there are countries where they're saying, if you want to have people elected at whatever level, they have to be 50% women. 50% women, because actually there are more of us than there are of them anyway. You know, but most people don't know that the version of American history that many, many people in our country know is like next to nothing. But they can tell you who the most famous pop star is and how much money such and such a movie got, but they don't really have a grasp on what the rest of the world is doing. And we need that because the little blue marble, right? We're all here together and we're destroying it.
Andrea. I'd just like to, since people are telling their personal experience, in my previous life I worked with, on my board, at least 15 labor unions in corporate Cleveland. And what I found was that each union had a different culture. And the firefighters, the carpenters, the teamsters, each one there was a difference. So that was a learning experience for me. The other was with some of the corporate Cleveland that was also on my board. They would say, oh, we need always to have the unions with us. And it was because we got to reach into the community. And so I found that I just think it's a nice story, a piece of history that we need to say and remember. I know everything has changed and evolved, but it was healthy at that point in time in terms of civic and community building and change.
Thank you. We've been talking about current events and mostly the election in the Supreme Court. Now we'll look to the future a little bit. In 2020, who do you think will be the Democratic Party's nominee? Will the Democratic nominee be from the party's left or the center, or possibly even from the right? We talked about the Harbaugh candidacy coming up, someone who rejects Pelosi and admires some of Donald Trump's policies. Which is better for winning the election? Left, right, or center in the Democratic Party? In the back?
I'm just gonna say what I wish. And, what I wish is that we could move to the center and, that the political parties would realize that that's the only way that we're gonna get out of this mess we're in. The polarization is to try to reach back and somehow get rid of this extremism that we're seeing so broadly. And it gives me a lot of distress, and I don't have a lot of currently faith in either party that they're going to be able to help us do that. And so I don't understand, you know, maybe some of you have some feelings about how we're going to do that, but either party right now is just going for staying in power. And so those are my thoughts.
Wayne has something to say in the back here.
I think it's something we all know, the center is not where it used to be.
Yeah, that's right.
It has been pushed way, way, way to a different place. And I think what will happen is you'll see a swing the other direction. It's kind of like an undamped oscillation now. We are out of control. And it's gonna swing way left. And Donald Trump made a speech yesterday that was totally insightful, is that a word? Incendiary. He is trying to start a civil war, and I think we're in a dangerous place, but I think it's gonna swing way left. My personal opinion on that.
This isn't an I think, this is an I hope. I would hope that the Congress could go back to a time when they actually talked to each other and they went to cocktail parties together and their wives knew each other. It didn't matter whether they were Democrats or Republicans. Pardon? Their spouses, I'm sorry. Their spouses. Anyway, yes, their spouses. That's my hope, because until we get to that kind of a place where we can have people talking across the aisle and getting along a little bit better, we're going to have these extremes, which I don't think is healthy, to go back and forth. And in the older days, what I read recently, and it made me think, wow, everybody has some good in them. Richard Nixon is the person who started the Environmental Protection Agency. You know, that's how different the world is right now. And so I'm hoping for more of the center, and I'm hoping for people to be able to talk across the aisle, because until we get to that, this yo-yoing is just not good for anybody.
It may not be a question of left, right, or center. Maybe it's a question of man versus woman. How about that one?
Going back to the idea of being civil to each other, of having them have their coffee together, Citizens United had made that impossible, whatever that thing is. It said you could put infinity of money. And so now all our politicians, instead of having collegial time, are very busy running around trying to get a lot of money from people. This is ridiculous. They can't govern if they're not doing the research and the study and the conversations, because they're out trying to raise money. We have to stop this money thing.
I guess my short answer to that is I don't think that's going to happen. And since the past, in my opinion, the past 45 years have been all about the Supreme Court and the judiciary. And I don't know, Mark, who with the four were who voted in your Supreme Court case, but I could guess. And nothing's going to change until the Democrats figure out how to win. And I don't have a name for you, but I could describe who it's going to be, or it should be. And it shouldn't be somebody with a lot of baggage, shouldn't be somebody who's currently a front runner. It shouldn't be somebody from the Northeast or the West Coast, because that's too toxic to states like Missouri and Arizona, who the Democrats could win. If they ran a candidate who could win the Senate in Texas, he should jump to the front of the line. You know, the most successful Democratic candidates have been the ones who don't put off put off 21 red states. You can't start with that kind of deficit. We need to start with maybe 6 red states and run somebody who can carry Georgia, carry Texas, carry Montana. There's a Democratic senator from Montana. I could define who that person, what the characteristics of that person is. I won't give you a name because maybe that name's not out there yet. But it's just imperative that we run a candidate, well, assuming that most of you are Democrats, that the Democrats run a candidate who could be credible and isn't clearly identified as somebody who has baggage, from somebody from the Northeast, somebody from the West Coast, somebody who can carry Louisiana, Texas. It can be done, but it starts with that, and until you can get some votes on the Supreme Court, nothing's going to change. And those shrill people who are protesting Kavanaugh's nomination were playing right into Trump's hands. And I think personally that they're going to lose votes to the Democrats this fall, and that bothers me.
Unfortunately, in my view, your definition of a good candidate is one without baggage, but you can't become prominent enough to be a candidate without baggage, unfortunately. And we're all at the end of this, I think.
We're about at the end, yes, and it's been a pleasure to sit up here and look at you. I've enjoyed that immensely. The only point of view that I really objected to is when Debbie said there are too many old people. I'd like to point out that she said that because she's a young whippersnapper. And discount her opinion, please.
So thank you very much. Are we about out of time?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on these issues. And Susan, do you want to say something?
I just want to remind people that we will not have a forum next Sunday. That's breakfast time. But after that, on October 21st, that is the discussion on abortion, and it will be an excellent discussion, I guarantee it. And be sure you have some of these brochures and share them with other people. These discussions are informative, they are meaningful, they're energizing to all of us. I can't say enough good things about them, but of course you know I'm very objective.
One quick comment for those who were not here last week. We had a guest for the sewer district and water, and there are handouts over there, and I would encourage you to pick them up. Good information. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate your opinion.
I was wondering if I could work it in somehow. Didn't seem.
You grab her and I'll slap her. There she is, right behind you. He's gonna grab you, I'm gonna slap you around a little bit. I'll tell you a funny story. I went to get my driver's license. Your hair is not brown, it's white.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I'm white. So a little later on, while we were waiting for the computer to catch up, I said, I got my driver's license at this office.